They said it was just a test. 3 starving military dogs, no protection, no handler, no escape. And her, they didn't even use her name. They just shoved her inside and watched, waiting for blood. But the moment those dogs stepped forward, snarling, circling, teeth bared, something happened they couldn't explain. The aggression stopped. The growls fell silent. And within 60 seconds, the same animals they'd weaponized were sitting at her feet like they'd always known her. Because she wasn't just a visitor, wasn't a consultant, wasn't a mistake. She was the Navy SEAL they thought they could break. And today, she didn't just pass their test. She exposed the entire system that created it. But before we show you how a decorated combat handler tamed 3 attack-trained canines without a leash, a command, or a single word, you need to understand where this story really begins. Not in that cage, not on that California coast, in the mountains of Afghanistan, 18 months earlier, with a dog named Shadow and a choice no one should ever have to make. The wind came off the Hindu Kush cold and sharp, carrying the smell of cordite and dust. Captain Evelyn Mercer knelt in the dirt, hands pressed against fur matted with blood, and made the call that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Medic on the squad leader. Now. The corpsman hesitated for half a second, looking between the wounded SEAL and the Belgian Malinois convulsing beside him. Half a second that felt like years. Ma'am, the dog... I gave you an order. Shadow's breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind that meant internal bleeding, the kind that meant minutes, not hours. His dark eyes found hers through the haze of shock, and in them she saw something worse than pain. Trust, complete and absolute, the certainty that whatever she decided would be the right thing, that she would never let him down. The IED had been a masterpiece of cruelty, triple-layer pressure plate hidden beneath what looked like scattered rocks. Shadow had alerted 6 meters out, his whole body going rigid in that perfect point that meant death was close. But the Taliban fighter watching from the ridge had triggered the secondary device remotely. Shadow had been standing between the bomb and the extraction point when it detonated. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb survived, took shrapnel to the leg and shoulder, but the corpsman stabilized him in 4 minutes. They got him to the bird, got him to Bagram, got him home to his wife and 3 daughters in Virginia Beach. Shadow died in Evelyn's arms 7 minutes after the blast. She held him as his breathing slowed, as his body stopped fighting, as the light faded from eyes that had never once looked at her with anything but absolute faith. His last breath was a soft exhale that sounded almost like relief, like he was telling her it was okay, like he knew she'd made the right choice, even if she'd never believe it herself. His blood soaked into the Afghan soil, joined the blood of 1,000 other warriors who'd given everything for missions that would never make the news. She'd made the right call, the tactical call, the call that saved a man with a family, a career, a future. But right didn't mean it didn't cost her something she couldn't get back. 18 months later, the California coast looked nothing like Afghanistan, but Evelyn still smelled cordite when the wind shifted wrong, still heard that final exhale in the quiet moments before sleep, still woke at 3 in the morning, reaching for a dog that wasn't there. The truck rattled over the cattle guard at the entrance to Colonel James Thornton's property, tires crunching on gravel that hadn't been raked in months. 50 acres of coastal scrub and live oak tucked into the hills north of Coronado, where the tourists didn't venture and the real estate developers hadn't found yet. The house was small, weathered, the kind of structure that had been standing since the 1960s and would probably stand another 60 years out of pure stubbornness. A detached garage sat to the left, doors open, tools scattered across a workbench that had seen 4 decades of use. And in the yard, moving with the kind of economy that only came from a lifetime of practice, was the man who'd taught her father everything he knew about leading men into hell and bringing them home alive. Colonel James Thornton was 68 years old and looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the Sierra Nevada. Broad shoulders, still straight despite the years. Hands that had held leashes in Grenada and Panama and the First Gulf War, scarred from bites and wire and the 1,000 small violences of a life spent at the sharp end. He was working with a dog, not just any dog, a Belgian Malinois, older now, muzzle gone gray, but moving with that distinctive grace that marked the ones who'd seen real work. The dog, Dutch, she remembered. Retired from service in 2003, he circled a makeshift obstacle course in the yard, responding to hand signals so subtle most people wouldn't have caught them. Thornton saw her truck and raised one hand. Dutch froze mid-stride, dropped into a perfect sit, and waited. Evelyn cut the engine and stepped out into air that smelled like sage and ocean salt. "You're early," Thornton said, not turning, still watching the dog. "I'm on time." "Same thing your father used to say." He gave a short whistle, released Dutch with a hand signal, and the dog trotted over to a water bowl, drinking deep. He also used to show up the night before just to scout the terrain. "You sleep in your truck again?" She had. Parked at a rest stop 40 miles north. Seat reclined, Glock within reach. Old habits dying exactly as hard as they were supposed to. Wanted to be fresh for the meeting? Meeting? Thornton finally turned, and his eyes were the same pale blue she remembered from childhood, from the funeral, from every difficult conversation that followed. "That what we're calling this? What would you call it?" "A chance for me to tell you you're walking into a goddamn ambush, and you should turn that truck around right now." Evelyn crossed the yard, stopped at the fence line. Dutch looked up from his water, ears forward, assessing. She didn't reach out, didn't presume, just stood still and let the dog make his own decisions. After 5 seconds, Dutch's tail gave a single wag. Not submission, recognition. "He remembers you," Thornton said. "I remember him." She'd been 14 the first time she'd met Dutch, summer of 2011. Fresh off Thornton's last deployment, a combat tour in Afghanistan that the old man never talked about in detail. Dutch had been different then, younger, harder, the kind of focused intensity that marked the ones who'd done the real work downrange. Thornton had brought the dog to her mother's house in San Diego, 3 years after her father's death, and spent an afternoon teaching her the basics. Not pet training, the real work. How to read a dog's posture, how to move without triggering prey drive, how to be worth following. "Your father asked me to watch over you," Thornton had said that day, kneeling beside Dutch in the backyard. "He knew the odds. He knew what Somalia was. And he made me promise that if something happened, I'd make sure you understood what he died for." She'd been angry then. 14 and angry at a world that had taken her father and left her with a gold star and a folded flag and a mother who cried in the bathroom when she thought Evelyn couldn't hear. "He died for nothing," she'd said. "Some warlord in a country nobody cares about." Thornton hadn't gotten angry, hadn't argued. He just put a hand on Dutch's flank and said, "He died for the men next to him, same as every warrior since the beginning. That's not nothing. That's everything." Now, 14 years later, standing in that same man's yard with her own ghost riding her shoulders, Evelyn understood. "You heard about Shadow?" she said. It wasn't a question. Thornton nodded once. "Read the after action. You made the right call." "Doesn't feel right." "Never does. But right and easy aren't the same thing. Your father learned that in Mogadishu. I learned it in Grenada. You learned it in Afghanistan." He crossed to the fence, leaned against the post. "Now someone's going to try to teach you that you don't belong in this work because you're carrying the weight of it. That about sum it up?" "Something like that. The program at Coronado, the one you're supposed to evaluate, temporary assignment, 30 days, observer status." Thornton's voice went flat. "Bullshit. Sir? You know what observer status means in a place like that? It means they're testing you, waiting for you to fail so they can paper your jacket and send you home." Evelyn didn't argue. They both knew he was right. "Chief Warrant Officer Warren Haskell," Thornton continued, "runs the program now. You know anything about him? Read his file. Former Ranger, solid record. 2 deployments Iraq, 1 Afghanistan. His file doesn't mention his father. Should it?" Thornton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old history. "Chief Petty Officer Raymond Haskell served under me from 1987 to 1989. Dog handler. One of the worst I ever saw." He walked to the garage, pulled a worn cardboard box from a high shelf, and returned with a file folder marked with dates from 3 decades past. Inside were incident reports, witness statements, photographs that made Evelyn's jaw tighten, dogs with scars that didn't come from combat, kennels with blood on the concrete, a formal investigation that ended with a dishonorable discharge and a pension stripped. Raymond Haskell believed pain was control, Thornton said. Believed dogs were weapons that needed breaking before they could be useful. I reported him in 1988. Took a year to build the case. He fought it all the way to court-martial. A pause. And lost. Evelyn looked at the photos again, at the eyes of dogs that had given up hoping for anything better. Family never recovered, Thornton continued. His wife left him. His son Warren grew up hearing that his old man was wronged, that the new military was soft, that men like me destroyed good handlers with politics and regulations. You think the son is trying to prove the father was right? I think the son has spent 30 years believing his family was dishonored by men who didn't understand that war requires hard choices. Thornton closed the file. And I think he's going to see you as the embodiment of everything he hates about the modern military. Woman, decorated combat record, carrying guilt instead of rage. He handed her the file. He's going to test you, Evelyn, and it won't be fair. I didn't join the Navy for fair. No, you joined because your father did, because you wanted to understand what he died for, and because some part of you thinks that if you're good enough, hard enough, you can make his sacrifice mean something. Thornton's voice gentled. But you can't carry him and Shadow both. Not and do this work. The words hit like small arms fire, precise and devastating. Then what do I do? You remember what I taught you, not about dogs, about leadership, the real kind. He met her eyes. You don't make them follow you. You become worth following. The Naval Special Warfare K9 Annex sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, 10 miles north of Coronado proper. Isolated, forgotten by everyone except the men who ran it and the dogs that lived there. Evelyn arrived at 06:15, 30 minutes before her scheduled briefing. The gate guard checked her temporary access badge twice, made a call to confirm, and waved her through with the kind of expression that said he'd already heard the stories. The facility was smaller than she'd expected. A single-story admin building, 6 kennel runs arranged in 2 rows, a training yard with obstacles that had seen better days, a storage building that listed slightly to the left, victim of foundation settling and decades of coastal weather. And everywhere, the sound of dogs, not the happy barking of pets. The focused, frustrated vocalizations of working animals that hadn't been worked properly, tones that spoke of confusion and stress and energy with nowhere to go. She parked in the gravel lot and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. Shadow had made sounds like that in the first days after they'd been partnered. Young, aggressive, washing out of 2 previous handler assignments because nobody could reach him. She'd spent 3 weeks doing nothing but sitting near his kennel, reading reports, drinking coffee, existing in his space without demanding anything. On day 22, he'd brought her his Kong. On day 30, they'd deployed together. On a mountain in Afghanistan 18 months ago, he'd saved 11 men and died doing it. Now she was here to evaluate a program that might be doing to other dogs what bad handlers had almost done to Shadow. She stepped out of the truck. The admin building door opened and a man emerged, 6'2", maybe 200 pounds, built like someone who still hit the gym with the intensity of active duty. Dark hair going gray at the temples, eyes that assessed her the way you'd assess a target. Chief Warrant Officer Warren Haskell. He didn't offer his hand. Captain Mercer, you're early. I'm on time. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Briefings at 06:45. You can wait in the admin building or observe morning kennel routine. Your choice. I'll observe. Observer status means you watch. No contact with the dogs. No recommendations unless I ask for them. No interference with my program. He stepped closer. Close enough that the challenge was unmistakable. We clear? Clear. Haskell turned and walked toward the kennels without checking to see if she followed. A power move. Subtle. The kind men like him had been using on women in uniform since the first one pinned on rank. Evelyn followed anyway. The morning kennel routine was brutally efficient. Handlers moved through their assigned runs, filling water bowls, dumping kibble, checking for obvious injuries. No one spoke to the dogs. No one made eye contact. It was mechanical, transactional, and the dogs responded in kind, pacing, whining, a few barking at nothing. Stress behaviors looking for an outlet. In the third run, a young Malinois, maybe 3 years old, smaller than average, was hurling himself against the chain link over and over, the metal rattling with each impact. "That's Rebel," one of the handlers said. A petty officer first class, early 30s, with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. His name tape read, "Briggs. Washed out twice. Too aggressive for deployment. We're testing him for base security work." Evelyn watched Rebel throw himself against the fence again, but she didn't see aggression. She saw desperation, confusion, a dog that didn't understand what was being asked of him and was trying everything he knew to get it right. "How often does he get worked?" Briggs glanced at Haskell, who was watching from 10 feet away. "We run him every 3 days. Standard protocol." Every 3 days. For a working breed that needed mental stimulation daily, or they ate themselves alive from the inside out. Evelyn made a mental note and said nothing. They moved to the training yard at 0700. 6 handlers with 6 dogs, Haskell overseeing from the shade of the equipment building, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The drills were old school: heel, sit, stay, down. Commands shouted. Leashes jerked when the dogs didn't respond fast enough. One handler, younger, maybe mid-20s, corrected his dog so hard the animal yelped, front paws lifting off the ground. A few of the other handlers laughed. Evelyn's hands curled into fists in her pockets, but she kept her face neutral. In the 4th drill, vehicle sweep protocol, Rebel was brought out. The young dog was wired, vibrating with energy that had nowhere to go, and the handler couldn't control him. "Out!" the handler commanded, gesturing toward a mock vehicle frame. Rebel lunged, but not at the target. At a scent cone 40 degrees off the expected path, nose working frantically, trying to tell his handler something. "God damn it!" The handler jerked the leash hard enough that Rebel's hindquarters lifted off the ground. The dog yelped, twisted, and in his confusion, snapped at the air near the handler's hand. The handler threw the leash down. "Useless piece of shit." Haskell stepped forward, nodded to another handler. "Kennel him. We'll reassess tomorrow." Rebel was dragged back to his run, still pulling toward the scent cone, still trying to do the job nobody understood he was doing. And Evelyn saw it. Not aggression, not failure. A dog with olfactory sensitivity so refined he was alerting on residual scent traces the standard protocol didn't account for. A dog that had been failed by every handler he'd ever worked with because they didn't speak his language, just like Shadow, before she'd learned to listen. She waited until the handlers dispersed for a water break, then approached Haskell. "The young Malinois, Rebel. I'd like to see his training records." Haskell's expression didn't change. "Observer status, Captain. You watch. You don't request files. I'm writing an evaluation. I need context." "You'll get what I decide you need." He stepped closer, close enough that it would have been intimidating to someone who hadn't been shot at in 3 different countries. "Let me be clear about something. This program works. My methods work. I've trained dogs that have saved lives in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. I don't need someone with a guilt complex and a dead partner telling me how to do my job." The words were designed to cut, designed to make her react. She didn't. "Understood," she said evenly. "I'll submit my observations at the end of the week." She turned and walked back to the fence line, every step measured, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But inside, the anger was building. Not hot, cold, the kind that settled deep and lasted. That night, Evelyn sat in her temporary barracks room and typed up her preliminary observations. Professional, factual, noting training frequencies, handler protocols, kennel conditions. She flagged 3 areas of concern: inconsistent feeding schedules, lack of mental stimulation for high-drive breeds, and correction methods that seemed disproportionate to behavioral issues. She sent the report to the NCRWC's oversight office at 2200 hours, At 22:15, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. She let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. You should leave while you still can. She deleted it and went to sleep with her Glock on the nightstand. Same as every other night since Afghanistan. Day 2 started the same as day 1. Early arrival, silent observation. Handlers going through the motions while dogs struggled to understand what was being asked of them. But on day 2, she noticed something else. The feeding logs. They were posted on a clipboard outside the main kennel building. A simple chart tracking which dogs had been fed and when. Standard protocol, nothing unusual, except the bowls in 3 of the runs were still empty at 0800 hours. Well past the scheduled feeding time, she checked the log. All 3 dogs, Titan, Ghost, and Rebel, were marked as fed at 0600. The discrepancy was small, easy to miss, probably just a handler running behind schedule. Except when she checked again at 1000 hours, the bowls were still empty. And when she casually walked past the storage building where the kibble was kept, she saw another handler emerging with only 2 bowls filled. Not a scheduling issue, deliberate. That evening, after the handlers had cleared out and the facility was quiet, Evelyn returned to the kennel area. Not inside, just near enough to observe. Titan, the largest of the 3, a battle-scarred male with a coat that had seen rougher handling than combat, was pacing his run in tight circles. Not the random pacing of boredom, the focused, desperate pacing of hunger. Ghost in the adjacent run was lying with his head on his paws, but his eyes were tracking every movement, hyper-vigilant, stressed. Rebel was throwing himself against the fence again, but slower now, exhausted. Evelyn pulled out her phone and photographed the feeding log, the empty bowls, the timestamps. Then she sent a message to Thornton. Found the first crack. They're starving them. His response came 4 minutes later. Be careful. Men who hurt dogs will hurt you without hesitation. Day 3. She submitted an updated report, more detailed. Specific references to feeding protocols and animal welfare standards. She didn't mention the shock collar she'd found hidden in the equipment locker. Banned since 2018. Serial number showing a 2024 purchase date because she was still building the case. Day 3, Haskell stopped pretending to tolerate her presence. The confrontation came at 1600 hours, in his office. Door closed. You're trying to destroy this program, he said. No preamble, no diplomacy. I'm documenting violations of NSWC standards. You're documenting your own bias. You lost your dog because you made a bad call under pressure. Now you're projecting that failure onto every handler here. Evelyn stood slowly, meeting his eyes. My dog died doing his job. That's not failure. That's sacrifice. What I'm documenting here is abuse. And if you can't see the difference, you don't belong in this position. Haskell's jaw worked. For a moment, she thought he might take a swing. Part of her almost hoped he would. Give her a reason to end this the fast way. Instead, he smiled. Cold. Calculated. You want to see abuse, Captain? Let me show you what real training looks like. What separates the operators from the tourists? He moved to the window, looked out at the training yard. Tomorrow, 14:30 hours, there's a test, heritage evaluation, something we used to do back when SEALs handled their own dogs, before the program got soft. I'm not interested in theater. Not theater, tradition. He turned to face her. You pass, you earn some respect around here. You fail, he shrugged. Well, maybe you'll finally understand why people like me question whether you belong. What kind of test? The kind that shows whether you can actually do this work. Or whether you're just collecting a paycheck while better people carry the load. Every instinct told her to refuse, to document this conversation, report it, let the chain of command handle it. But she thought about Rebel throwing himself against the fence, about Titan pacing in circles, about Ghost's hypervigilant eyes, about Shadow dying in her arms because she'd made the call that saved men instead of dogs. Fine, she said. Tomorrow, 14:30. I'll be there. Haskell's smile widened. Bring your A-game, Captain. You're going to need it. That night she called Thornton, told him about the test, about the feeding protocols, about the shock collar and the empty bowls, and the dogs that were being systematically broken by men who thought pain was the same as discipline. Thornton was quiet for a long time. He's going to use starved dogs, he said finally. It's an old stress test. Banned in the 90s, but the old-timers still talk about it. 3 high-drive dogs, food deprived, put in a confined space with a handler, no protection, no backup. You either control them or you get torn apart. How do I control them? You don't. You speak to them in a language they understand better than commands. He paused. Grenada, 1983. I was separated from my unit during the airfield assault. Ended up in a compound with 3 feral dogs that hadn't eaten in days. Territorial, aggressive. I had about 90 seconds before they decided I was food. What did you do? I stopped thinking like a human and started thinking like a pack animal. Showed them I wasn't a threat, wasn't prey. Just another member of the pack who happened to be there. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of old memory. I knelt, slowed my breathing, turned my head to expose my neck, and I waited. They didn't attack? They circled, tested. But dogs can smell cortisol at parts per trillion. When your stress levels drop, they know it. When you stop projecting fear, they stop responding to it. A pause. After about 3 minutes, the alpha sat. Then the others followed. Not because I dominated them, because I spoke their language. Evelyn closed her eyes, visualizing it. And you think that'll work tomorrow? I think you've got better instincts than any handler I've ever trained. And I think you know things about dogs that most people never learn. His voice hardened. But Evelyn, if this goes wrong, if those dogs are too far gone, you get out, you hear me? No heroics, no proving points. You get out alive. Understood. Your father made me promise to keep you safe. I'm holding you to that promise too. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the darkness of her barracks room and thought about promises. About fathers and dogs and the choices that defined who you were when everything else was stripped away. Tomorrow she'd step into a cage with 3 animals that had been tortured into weapons. And she'd either speak their language or become another casualty of men who thought violence was strength. She checked her Glock, set her alarm for 0500, and when sleep finally came, she dreamed of Shadow's eyes, the silent understanding that had existed between them in those final seconds. Trust. That was the word, the one that mattered more than any command. Tomorrow, she'd find out if 3 broken dogs could still remember what trust felt like, or if Haskell had finally succeeded in destroying the last thing that made them anything more than weapons. The morning of the test arrived with fog rolling off the Pacific, thick enough to muffle sound and turn the world gray. Evelyn arrived at the facility at 0545, 30 minutes earlier than usual. The kennel area was quiet, the dogs still sleeping, or at least pretending to, conserving energy for another day of confusion and stress and handlers who didn't understand them. She walked the perimeter, checked the fence lines, located the cage they'd use for the test. A 20 by 20 enclosure of heavy-gauge chain link at the far corner of the training yard. Rusted steel posts, ground packed hard as concrete. Dark stains and patches that might have been oil or blood or both. At 0600, a figure emerged from the shadows near the equipment shed. Briggs, the handler who'd been watching her since she arrived. The one who'd described Rebel as aggressive and useless. The one she'd written off as another Haskell loyalist. But something was different about him now. He was carrying 2 bowls of kibble, and he was walking toward the kennel area, not away from it. Evelyn watched from the shadows as Briggs approached Rebel's run. The young dog, who should have been asleep, was already at the fence, tail low, eyes hopeful. Briggs knelt down, slid the bowl under the fence gap that shouldn't have existed but clearly did. Rebel didn't attack the food, didn't inhale it the way a starving dog should. He looked at Briggs first, waited. And only when Briggs gave a small nod did he begin to eat. You shouldn't be here. Briggs had turned, spotted her. His face went pale in the pre-dawn light. Evelyn stepped out of the shadows. Neither should you, but here we both are. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Briggs stood, slowly, his hands visible, non-threatening. I'm not your enemy, he said quietly. Whatever you think you've seen. I've seen you stand by while handlers abuse their dogs, and I've seen you sneak food to a dog everyone else has written off as a lost cause. She crossed the distance between them, stopped 5 feet away. So which one is the real you? Briggs looked at Rebel, who was still eating. Slow, careful, the way dogs ate when they learned that food could be taken away at any moment. I've been doing this job 8 years, he said finally, telling myself the methods worked, that the dogs that washed out were broken from the start, that Haskell knows what he's doing because he's been doing it longer than me. He met her eyes. But I've got a dog, Coda, my own dog, not the program's. A 3-year-old Malinois I've been training since he was a pup. Best detection dog I've ever worked with. Smart, eager, would do anything for me. His voice cracked. Haskell's been evaluating him for the program. Says Coda's too soft. Doesn't respond to hard corrections the way he should. Doesn't break the way Haskell thinks dogs need to break before they can be useful. What happens if Coda fails the evaluation? Briggs didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. The dogs that wash out, Evelyn said slowly, they don't go to retirement programs, do they? I don't know where they go. Nobody tells us. They just disappear. One day they're in the kennels, the next they're gone. Haskell says they're transferred to other facilities, other programs. He shook his head. But I've been checking the transfer records, 11 dogs in the last 18 months, and none of them show up anywhere else in the system. Evelyn thought about the photographs in Thornton's file, the dogs with empty eyes, the kennels with blood on the concrete. Some things hadn't changed in 30 years. Today, she said, the test. What can you tell me? Briggs glanced around, making sure they were alone. The cage they're using. The padlock won't be locked. It'll look locked, but it won't be. That's the trap. Psychological. If you try to escape, you prove you're weak. If you stay and get hurt, I prove I'm reckless. Either way, Haskell wins. Evelyn nodded slowly. Thank you. She turned to leave. Captain. She stopped. Briggs was still kneeling by Rebel's run. The dog had finished eating and was now pressing his nose through the fence, seeking contact. Whatever happens today, if there's a way to save them, the dogs, I mean, not just Rebel, all of them. He looked at her. I'll help, whatever it takes. I can't watch any more dogs disappear and pretend I don't know what's happening. Evelyn didn't respond, but as she walked back to her truck to prepare for what was coming, she allowed herself a single thought. Maybe there was still something worth saving here. Not just the dogs, the men who'd lost their way trying to serve them. 1,300 hours, 90 minutes until the test. Evelyn sat in her barracks room, eyes closed, breathing slow. 4 counts in through the nose, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out through the mouth. The same technique Thornton had taught her when she was 14. The one he said had saved his life more times than he could count. She visualized the cage, the 3 dogs, the handlers watching from outside, waiting for her to fail. She visualized success, not dominance, not control, connection. At 1,400 hours, she walked to the training yard. The fog had burned off, replaced by California sunshine that made everything look sharper than it was, more real, more dangerous. 7 handlers had gathered near the equipment shed. Briggs stood at the center, phone in hand, already recording. A few others leaned against the fence. Arms crossed, faces showing that particular mixture of anticipation and cruelty that marked men who'd never been held accountable for the smaller violences. Haskell emerged from the kennel building, leading 3 dogs on heavy-gauge chain leads. Titan came first. 88 pounds of coiled violence. Coat dark with old scars that didn't come from training accidents. His eyes were flat, empty. The kind of emptiness that came from learning that hope was something that only led to pain. He didn't pull against the lead, didn't resist, just moved with mechanical precision. A machine wearing a dog shape. Ghost followed, white chest heaving, barrel-bodied, a 3-inch scar running across his muzzle where someone had hit him with something metal. His eyes never stopped moving, tracking everything, trusting nothing. When Briggs shifted his weight, Ghost flinched. Rebel was last, the youngest, still holding on to something the others had lost, but losing it fast. His paws scraped the gravel, resisting, and Haskell jerked the lead hard enough to lift his front legs off the ground. The dog yelped, not pain, confusion, No one else reacted. Evelyn's hands stayed in her pockets, loose, but her pulse was climbing. She forced it down. The breathing pattern Thornton had drilled into her, the rhythm that turned panic into focus. Haskell stopped 10 feet from the cage and looked at her for the first time. Last chance to walk away, Captain. No one here will think less of you. The lie was transparent. They'd think less of her either way. Walk away, she was weak. Go in, she was reckless. The game was rigged from the start, so she changed the game. How long since they've been fed? Haskell's expression didn't change. 36 hours. Standard fast before high-stress evolution. Sharpens their drive. Show me the feeding log. You saw it this morning. Show me again. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not quite fear, recognition that she was building a case, and he couldn't stop her without revealing exactly what he was hiding. He gestured to another handler, who pulled a clipboard from the equipment shed and handed it over. Evelyn scanned the entries. Titan, Ghost, Rebel, all marked as fed at 0600 hours on Monday. Today was Wednesday. That made it 54 hours, not 36. She photographed the log with her phone. Haskell's jaw tightened. Clock's running, Captain. You doing this or not? She handed back the clipboard and walked to the cage entrance. The gate was secured with a simple latch and a padlock that hung open on its hasp. Just hanging there, a psychological prop, making it look secure while leaving it accessible. She noted that too. Briggs stepped closer, phone tracking her movements. For the record, ma'am, this is completely voluntary. No one's forcing you to do this. Noted. She looked at the three dogs. Titan's eyes were locked on her now. Not aggressive yet, just focused, calculating. Ghost was panting shallow and fast, stress breathing. That meant his cortisol was spiking. Rebel was trying to back away from Haskell, pulling against the lead, looking for any escape. Evelyn pulled out her phone and opened the voice recorder. Captain Evelyn Mercer, Wednesday, 14:28 hours. I am voluntarily entering a training enclosure with 3 military working dogs. Chief Warrant Officer Haskell has stated the dogs have been fasted 36 hours, though feeding logs indicate 54 hours. No safety officer is present. No veterinary oversight is present. She paused. I am proceeding because these animals deserve someone who will speak their language instead of breaking them. She hit stop and handed the phone to Briggs. Hold on to that. If this goes wrong, that recording goes to NSC Command and NCIS. Understood? Briggs's expression shifted, something like respect replacing the nervous anticipation. He took the phone. Haskell opened the cage gate. Your funeral, Captain. The dogs were led in one at a time. Titan first, unclipped from the lead. Moving to the far corner with mechanical precision. No wasted movement. Pure efficiency born from repetition and punishment. Ghost second, released near the left fence. He immediately started pacing the perimeter, nose low, checking for threats or exits or both. Rebel last. The moment his lead was unclipped, he bolted to the rear corner, pressed himself against the chain link, and froze. Not aggression, terror wearing an aggressive dog's body. Haskell backed out. The gate closed with a metallic clang that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The padlock hung open, unlatched. Just like Briggs had said, a test within a test. Would she panic? Try to escape? Prove she was weak? She stood 3 feet from the gate, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides, and the dog started moving. Titan first. He rose from his corner position and began circling left, eyes never leaving her. Not a chase, a hunt, establishing position before the strike. Ghost came from the right, wider arc, moving to flank. Classic pack predation pattern. One from the front, one from the side. The third, Rebel, would come from behind once the target was focused on the first two threats. Outside the cage, the handlers had gone quiet. Briggs's phone was still recording, but no one was laughing now. Evelyn didn't move, didn't reach for the gate, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. Instead, she closed her eyes for 2 seconds and heard Thornton's voice. Stop thinking like a human. Start thinking like a pack animal. She found her center. Let the familiar rhythm steady her pulse, heart rate dropping from 110 to 95 to 82. cortisol levels decreasing with each controlled breath, chemical signatures shifting from fear to calm authority. Dogs could smell it, the change. At parts per trillion, their Jacobson's organs detected what humans couldn't even measure. She opened her eyes. Titan was 15 feet away now, head low, hackles starting to rise, a deep growl building in his chest. Subsonic, the kind that rattled your sternum from 20 feet away. Evelyn dropped to one knee, slowly, controlled. Right knee down, left leg ready. Tactical awareness even in submission. Her hands came to rest on her thighs, palms up, fingers slightly curled but open. Universal canine signal. No threat, no weapon, no challenge. Titan's growl didn't stop, but his forward movement did. He froze, head tilted slightly, recalculating. Ghost continued circling, wider now, uncertain. His panting increased, but the quality changed. Not aggression, confusion. Evelyn turned her head 35 degrees to the right, exposed the side of her neck, the carotid artery, the kill zone, the ultimate submission display in canine hierarchy. And she waited. 5 seconds passed. 10, 15. The only sound was breathing. Hers, the dog's, the handlers outside holding their collective breath. Titan took one step forward, then another, his nose extended, testing the air currents, reading the chemical composition of her scent. No synthetic fear smell, no adrenaline spike, just the steady, even signature of someone who had made a choice and accepted its consequences. The growl faded. Not gone, just quieter. At 30 seconds, Titan's ears pivoted forward, the universal canine gesture of curiosity replacing threat assessment. He stepped closer, close enough that Evelyn could see the scars on his muzzle, the places where someone had used a collar wrong or a hand hard or both. Close enough to smell the 54 hours of hunger on his breath. He sniffed her open palm, once, twice, and the growl died completely. Ghost had stopped pacing. He stood at the 8 o'clock position, head low, tail neutral, watching, not aggressive now, waiting to see what the alpha would do. Rebel was still pressed against the rear fence, but his eyes were locked on Titan and the strange human who wasn't acting like prey. Evelyn exhaled. 8 counts. Controlled. Steady. The kind of breath that said she wasn't going anywhere. Wasn't running. Wasn't a threat. Just present. Titan's head came up slightly. His ears, which had been pinned back in aggression, rotated to a neutral position. And then he did something no one expected. He sat, not commanded, not forced. He chose it. And in that choice, everything changed. End of part 1. What happened next would prove everything the old guard believed was wrong. In part 2, we'll show you how those crucial seconds in the cage changed military dog training forever. And the dark secret Evelyn uncovered that went far deeper than abuse. A secret that would put her life in danger and force her to become exactly what they never wanted her to be. A leader. Ghost took 3 tentative steps forward, his barrel chest still heaving, but the panic breathing was slowing. He approached from her left, moving carefully, testing each step like he expected punishment. Evelyn didn't turn her head, didn't make eye contact, just stayed still and let him make his own decision. He sniffed her exposed neck, the most vulnerable part, where bite force would be lethal in seconds. She felt his breath on her skin, hot and rapid, and then it slowed. His tongue flicked out once, touching her jawline. Not aggression, a canine trust kiss. The gesture a subordinate makes to a pack leader when accepting their authority. Ghost circled to her front and sat 3 feet away. Not as close as Titan, still maintaining distance, but sitting, choosing calm over chaos. 2 down. Rebel was the last, the youngest, the one who'd been failed by every handler who'd ever tried to work with him, because no one understood that his aggression was actually hypervigilance born from trauma. He was still against the fence, shaking slightly, torn between instinct and learned fear. Evelyn turned her head slightly. Not enough to break the submission posture, just enough to bring him into peripheral vision, and she made a sound, not a word, not a command, Just a soft exhalation, the kind a mother dog makes to calm her pups. The kind that said, "You're safe here." Rebel's ears twitched. His eyes, which had been darting everywhere, locked on her. 30 seconds passed. A minute. And then Rebel moved. Not fast, not aggressive. He crept forward, belly low, every muscle screaming conflict between approach and flight. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough to bolt if needed, close enough to engage if she proved to be a threat. Evelyn stayed perfectly still. Rebel took another step, another. His nose worked overtime, processing every scent molecule, cross-referencing it against every human he'd ever known. This one was different. Didn't smell like anger. Didn't smell like impatience. Didn't smell like the sharp chemical signature of someone about to hurt him. He sniffed her extended hand, her wrist, her forearm, and then he did something that made two of the handlers outside curse in disbelief. He bowed, front legs extended, chest dropping, rear end slightly elevated, the universal canine play signal, the gesture that said, "I choose to trust you." Then he sat, right beside Titan, shoulder to shoulder with a dog that could have killed him in seconds but who had chosen calm because the human in front of them had spoken a language they understood. 3 dogs, 0 commands. Just over a minute from entry to complete behavioral shift. Evelyn rose slowly, one smooth motion, no sudden movements, giving them time to adjust to the change in her posture. All 3 dogs remained seated, calm, watching her with something that wasn't fear or aggression, recognition. She turned to face the gate and looked directly at Haskell through the chain link. Her voice came out flat, controlled, carrying the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. "Open it!" For 5 long seconds, no one moved. The handlers stared. Briggs's phone continued recording, capturing everything. Haskell's face had gone pale. Not fear, something worse. The realization that his carefully constructed narrative, that she was weak, that she didn't belong, that women couldn't do this work, had just been demolished by a different kind of strength demonstrated in those crucial moments. He didn't move toward the gate. Evelyn didn't wait. She simply walked to the chain link and lifted the latch from inside. The gate swung open easily, proving what she'd known from the beginning. It had never been locked. The entire thing had been psychological warfare. Make her think she was trapped. Make her panic. Make her prove she didn't belong. Instead, she'd proven something else entirely. She stepped out of the cage. Titan stood and followed her. Not commanded, not leashed. He simply walked beside her. Calm, focused, moving like they'd been partners for years instead of seconds. Ghost and Rebel stayed inside the enclosure, seated, watching, but the panic was gone from their eyes. The training yard was silent. That particular kind of silence that grows when every person present realizes they've just witnessed something they don't yet have the language to explain. Briggs lowered his phone slowly. His face had gone from nervous anticipation to something approaching awe. "That's the Grenada Protocol," he said quietly. "My grandfather told me about it. Force recon, early 80s. They used it in survival school. Said it only worked if the handler had ice in their veins and understood pack language better than most people understand English." He looked at Evelyn. For the first time since she'd arrived, there was no mockery in his voice. "Who trained you?" "Colonel Thornton." The name dropped like a tactical nuke. Haskell's jaw worked. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, clenched into fists. Because he knew that name. Everyone who'd worked K9 programs in the past 30 years knew that name. The man who'd revolutionized military working dog training during Desert Storm. The man who'd testified at court-martials against abusive handlers. The man who'd destroyed Haskell's father's career. And now his protege had just walked into Haskell's territory and made his entire program look like amateur hour. "You think that means something?" Haskell's voice was tight, controlled, the kind of control that masked something darker underneath. "You think one parlor trick makes you qualified to evaluate my program? I think 3 starved dogs just chose trust over fear in under 2 minutes. And I think that says more about your program than any report I could write." Evelyn didn't flinch. "We're done here for today." She turned and walked toward the admin building. Titan followed without being called, and behind her, she heard Briggs's voice, quiet but clear. I've been doing this wrong. For 8 years. I've been doing this all wrong. That night, Evelyn sat in her barracks room and compiled everything. The photographs, the feeding logs, the shock collar serial numbers, the timestamps that didn't match. The video Briggs had sent to her personal phone 30 minutes after the cage test with a single message. Use it. 47 pages. Single-spaced. Footnoted. Devastating. She sent the report to Lieutenant Commander Harrison at the NSWC Oversight Office at 2100 hours. Then she sat in the darkness and waited. At 22:15, her phone rang. Unknown number. Same local area code as the threatening message from days before. She answered. Captain Mercer. A woman's voice. Professional. Carrying the weight of authority. This is Lieutenant Commander Harrison. I've received your preliminary documentation. We need to talk. Yes, ma'am. I've also received a complaint from Chief Haskell. Says you're conducting unauthorized training evolutions and interfering with his program. Says you performed an unsupervised stress test with high-value working dogs and endangered facility security. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. Ma'am, I have video documentation of the entire evolution. Chief Haskell initiated the stress test. I participated at his request, and the dogs were not endangered. They were being starved as part of what he called heritage training methods. Silence on the line. 5 seconds, 10. Send me everything you have. Photos, videos, logs, documentation, all of it. By 0800 hours tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. And Captain, a pause. Be very sure of your facts, because if you're wrong about this, if you're pushing a personal agenda, I will personally ensure you never work in a K9 program again. Are we clear? Crystal, ma'am. Good. 0800. Don't be late. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in the darkness for another hour, organizing, verifying, making sure every piece of evidence was ironclad. Then she sent the package and waited for the hammer to fall. The call came at 0547 hours, 14 minutes before sunrise. Evelyn was already awake, had been since 0430, running through contingencies the way she used to before mission briefs in Afghanistan, planning for the best outcome, preparing for the worst. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice was clipped, professional, carrying the weight of decisions already made. Captain Mercer, I've reviewed your documentation, all 47 pages. I've also consulted with the JAG office, Veterinary Services, and the NSWC Command Ethics Board. A pause. As of 0600 hours this morning, Chief Warrant Officer Haskell is relieved of duty pending a full NCIS investigation. You are hereby appointed Interim Director of the K9 program at Coronado Annex, effective immediately. Evelyn sat up, phone pressed to her ear, processing words she hadn't expected to hear for another 3 weeks. Ma'am, I'm not qualified for... You just documented the most comprehensive case of systemic animal abuse I've seen in 23 years of service. You demonstrated tactical proficiency with high-risk animals under conditions that would have broken most handlers. And according to Colonel Thornton, who I called personally at 0300 hours, you're the best handler he's trained in 4 decades. Harrison's voice softened slightly. You're qualified, Captain. Question is whether you're willing. Through the window, the sky was turning from black to gray, that pre-dawn moment when the world held its breath before committing to daylight. I'm willing, ma'am. Good. You'll have full operational control. Personnel decisions are yours. Training protocols are yours. A pause. But Mercer, this is a test case. There are people at 06 level and above who think I'm making a mistake, who think women can't run combat K9 programs, who think your methods are too soft for real-world operations. Her voice hardened. You fail, you don't just hurt yourself. You set back every female handler in the pipeline. Understood? Understood, ma'am. One more thing. Haskell had allies. They're not going to take this quietly. Watch your 6. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in the growing light and felt the weight settle on her shoulders. Not just responsibility for dogs and handlers, responsibility for proving that a different way was possible. That strength and trust weren't opposites. That you could honor tradition without being enslaved by it. She checked her Glock, holstered it, and drove to the facility through fog so thick her headlights barely penetrated 10 feet ahead. By the time she arrived at 0615, three unmarked sedans were already parked in the lot. NCIS, federal agents in windbreakers moving through the facility with the methodical efficiency of people who'd done this 100 times before. Haskell stood outside the admin building, hands cuffed behind his back, face blank. When he saw Evelyn, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, something colder. A promise that this wasn't over. She didn't look away, met his gaze, held it, until the agents guided him into the back of a sedan and drove away. The lead investigator approached, a woman in her mid-40s with gray-streaked hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much human cruelty disguised as duty. Captain Mercer, Special Agent Reeves, will need access to all facility records, training logs, equipment inventories, handler personnel files. We'll also need to interview your entire staff over the next 72 hours. Whatever you need. And we'll need veterinary evaluations on all 14 dogs currently in your care. Full physical exams, behavioral assessments, the works. I can have Dr. Aldridge here by 0800. Reeves nodded, made a note on her tablet. One more thing. We found additional evidence during our preliminary sweep. Equipment that wasn't in your report. Suggests this goes deeper than one bad actor. She looked up. How much do you know about offshore sales? Evelyn's stomach dropped. Nothing confirmed. Suspected something but couldn't prove it. We can prove it now. Reeves's voice went flat. Chief Haskell was running a side business. Enhanced aggression training for private military contractors, selling dogs that washed out of the military program to unregulated PMCs operating in Africa and the Middle East. We've identified at least 11 animals over the past 18 months. 11 dogs, 11 animals that should have been retired or rehomed, instead sold to the highest bidder, shipped to war zones where nobody checked handler credentials or cared about welfare standards. Can we get them back? Reeves's expression softened slightly. We're working on it, but international jurisdiction is complicated. No promises. She closed her tablet. You've got a hell of a mess to clean up here, Captain. Good luck. The agents worked through the morning, methodical, thorough. While Evelyn gathered the handlers in the training yard, 7 men, ranging from mid-20s to early 50s, standing in loose formation, faces showing everything from confusion to hostility to carefully neutral professionalism. Briggs stood at the front. Behind him, 2 junior handlers whose names she'd barely learned. One of them, Peters, had caught her attention over the past few days. Quiet, observant. He'd been one of the ones who laughed when dogs were corrected too hard, but something had shifted in him after the cage test. To the left, 3 senior petty officers who'd been with Haskell since the program's inception. Arms crossed, jaws set, waiting to see if she'd try to tell them their entire careers had been built on cruelty. And at the far edge, Senior Chief Douglas Vance, 50 years old, 20 years in, face like weathered leather, eyes that gave nothing away. Evelyn didn't climb on anything, didn't try to manufacture authority through elevation, just stood at their level and spoke plainly. Chief Haskell has been relieved of duty. NCIS is investigating allegations of animal abuse, equipment fraud, and illegal sale of government property. I've been appointed interim director. She let that settle for 5 seconds. Some of you think that's a mistake. Some of you are relieved. Most of you are probably wondering what the hell happens next. Another pause. Here's what happens next. We rebuild this program from the ground up. We implement training protocols based on behavioral science, not tradition. We treat these dogs as partners, not equipment. She looked at each of them in turn. And anyone who can't make that shift has 2 options. Retrain under the new standards, or request transfer. No judgment, no career consequences, just honest assessment of whether you can adapt. Vance raised his hand. What if we think the old ways worked fine? Then I'd ask you to define worked, because from where I stand, we've got 3 dogs showing signs of severe trauma, 4 more on the edge of behavioral collapse, and a training program that was 1 lawsuit away from being shut down completely. She met his eyes. That's not working fine. That's a controlled burn that was about to go wildfire. Vance's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Briggs stepped forward. What do you need from us? Honesty about what you've seen, what you've done, what you knew was wrong but did anyway because that's how it had always been done. She looked at each of them again. I'm not here to destroy careers. I'm here to save dogs, and I can't do that alone. The meeting broke up 15 minutes later. 3 of the senior handlers requested immediate transfer. Vance stayed, but his body language screamed resistance. Peters approached her after the others dispersed. Ma'am, I want to work with Titan. She studied him, 26 years old, nervous but determined. Everyone else is afraid of him, but I watched you in that cage. Fear isn't the answer. No, she said, it isn't. Report to the kennels at 0600 tomorrow. We'll start slow. The 2 other junior handlers looked relieved. Briggs volunteered to be her second in command. No hesitation. The kind of commitment that came from seeing a better way and wanting to be part of it. By 1000 hours, Dr. Catherine Aldridge arrived with a veterinary team and began systematic evaluations. By 1200, the initial results were coming back, and they were worse than Evelyn had hoped, but exactly as bad as she'd feared. Titan, chronic pain from untreated shrapnel injury, malnutrition, stress indicators consistent with prolonged abuse. Ghost, scar tissue suggesting repeated impact trauma to the face and neck. Behavioral markers for PTSD, severe trust deficit with male handlers. Rebel hypervigilance disorder, acute stress response. Actually demonstrated superior olfactory sensitivity that had been misdiagnosed as aggression. 4 other dogs showed similar patterns. Injuries ignored, behaviors misunderstood, potential wasted because nobody had bothered to speak their language. Dr. Aldridge found Evelyn in the admin office at 1430, reviewing the medical reports, making notes, building treatment plans. You know what you're taking on here? Aldridge sat down without invitation. The prerogative of women who'd spent 40 years in male-dominated fields and had run out of patience for protocol. A disaster, Evelyn said. Yes, a disaster. But Aldridge was smiling. I've worked with Thornton since Desert Storm, seen him rebuild programs that were in worse shape. It's possible, just not easy. I don't need easy, I need effective. Then listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. Aldridge leaned forward. These dogs can recover, but recovery takes time. Months, not weeks. You're going to face pressure to show results immediately. From command, from handlers who think you're too soft, from people who want you to fail so they can say women can't do this work. Her voice hardened. And if you rush it, if you push these animals before they're ready, you'll break them worse than Haskell did. So what do? You trust the process, you trust the dogs, and you trust yourself. Aldridge stood. Thornton told me about Shadow, about Afghanistan, about the choice you made. Evelyn's hand stilled on the keyboard. He also told me you've been carrying that guilt like body armor, thinking if you just work hard enough, save enough dogs, it'll balance the scales. Aldridge's voice was gentle now. It won't. That's not how guilt works. But maybe if you let yourself, you can learn what Shadow was trying to teach you in those final seconds. Which was. That trust goes both ways. He trusted you to make the hard call. Now you have to trust that you made the right one. Aldridge left without waiting for a response, and Evelyn sat in the empty office, staring at medical reports that blurred into meaningless data because her eyes were burning and she refused to cry at work. Refused to show weakness when 14 dogs and 7 handlers were depending on her to be stronger than her own demons. She gave herself 60 seconds, found her center, let the familiar rhythm steady her pulse. Same technique that had saved her life in combat, calm dogs in cages, and was currently the only thing keeping her from driving to the nearest bar and not coming back. Then she pulled up a blank document and started writing the new training protocols. The first week passed in a blur of 18-hour days and incremental progress. Evelyn implemented baseline changes, fixed feeding schedules matched to metabolic requirements, mandatory enrichment time for all dogs, banned all punishment-based corrections. 2 more handlers quit in protest, citing her methods as dangerously soft. She let them go without argument and promoted Briggs to senior handler. he'd earned it. Every night after the others left, she found him in the kennel area, working with Coda, his own dog, learning the new techniques, unlearning the old ones. It's harder than I thought, he admitted one evening. Not the methods, the patience. Waiting for them to choose instead of forcing them to comply. That's the whole point, Evelyn said. The wait is where the trust gets built. She watched Coda respond to Briggs's quieter approach. The dog that Haskell had labeled too soft was thriving under methods that didn't require breaking him first. He's going to be fine, she said. Coda, he was never the problem. Briggs nodded, his hand resting on Coda's flank. I know that now. I just wish I'd known it sooner. Week 2 brought the first major test. A senior officer from NSWC Command arrived unannounced, demanding to see demonstration of readiness standards. Evelyn put Briggs and Rebel through an explosive detection evolution. The dog, previously labeled aggressive and untrainable, performed a flawless search pattern. Alerted on 4 concealed training aids in under 6 minutes. Previous program record, 11 minutes with 2 false alerts. The senior officer left without comment, but 3 days later, funding for the program was approved for another fiscal year. Among the handlers who'd stayed, Peters showed the most promise. A junior petty officer, quiet, observant. Something had shifted in him after the cage test, and it showed in his work. I want to understand what you did in there, he told Evelyn on day 12. The way Titan responded to you, I've never seen anything like it. It's not magic, she said. It's just listening, paying attention to what they're telling you instead of demanding they pay attention to what you're telling them. She assigned him to work with Titan, and watched Peters transform from a handler who relied on force to one who understood that patience was its own kind of strength. Week 3, Dr. Aldridge completed surgical repair on Titan's shrapnel injury. The big male spent 4 days recovering. Evelyn spent 4 nights sleeping on a cot outside his kennel, present but not intrusive, letting him know he wasn't alone. On the 5th day, Titan allowed her to change his bandages without sedation. On the 6th day, he brought her his Kong. The transformation was undeniable. Dogs that had been pacing and aggressive were now calm and focused. Handlers who'd relied on volume and force were learning that patience produced better results. The facility that had felt like a prison now felt like what it should have been all along. A partnership between species that had been working together for 10,000 years, but success bred new enemies. On day 19, Evelyn received a report that made her blood run cold. Senior Chief Douglas Vance, the 20-year veteran who'd stayed when others left, who'd watched her every move with those flat, unreadable eyes. NCIS had been digging into the PMC sales, following the money, and the trail led directly to Vance. He wasn't just a handler who'd looked the other way. He was the middleman, the one who'd connected Haskell to the contractors, who'd arranged the transport, who'd taken a cut of every dog sold into unregulated war zones. Evelyn found him in the equipment shed at 1700 hours, alone, packing a duffel bag with items that didn't belong to him. Going somewhere, Senior Chief? Vance turned slowly. His hand moved toward his belt, stopped when he saw Evelyn's hand resting on her holstered Glock. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't understand how this works, how it's always worked. Enlighten me. Dogs wash out. That's the reality. Most of them can't hack it. And when they can't hack it, they become liabilities. Mouths to feed, space to fill, problems to solve. His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a man who'd convinced himself that profit was the same as pragmatism. Haskell found a solution. Those dogs weren't going to make it anyway. At least this way, they served a purpose, made some money for people who deserved it. They were tortured into weapons and sent to die in wars nobody acknowledges. They were dogs. Vance's voice hardened. Not people. Dogs. And you're destroying careers. Destroying a program that's worked for decades because you can't tell the difference. I know the difference. Evelyn's hand didn't move from her weapon. The difference is that dogs trust us. They give us everything they have. Their loyalty, their instincts, their lives, and in return we owe them the basic dignity of not selling them to the highest bidder when they become inconvenient. Vance stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. You sound just like Thornton. Same righteous bullshit, same naive belief that doing things the soft way makes you better than the rest of us? He stepped forward. Let me tell you something about Thornton, about your precious mentor. He destroyed careers in '89, made it his personal mission to tear down everyone who disagreed with him, called it ethics, called it standards. His eyes went cold. It was just ego, just a man who couldn't stand that others had found a better way. Your connection to Haskell's father, Evelyn said. That's what this is about. My father served with Raymond Haskell, side by side. They believed the same things, that dogs needed hard hands, that the new ways were weakness dressed up as progress. Thornton destroyed both of them, called it justice. The pieces clicked into place. Vance wasn't just a corrupt middleman. He was a true believer, a man raised on stories of persecution, convinced that the old methods were right, that men like Thornton and women like Evelyn were enemies of everything the program should be. NCIS is on their way, Evelyn said quietly. You can come with me now, or you can try to run. But either way, this ends today. Vance's hand twitched toward his belt again. Don't, Evelyn said. I've put down better men than you, and I did it for less. 5 seconds of silence. Then Vance's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him all at once, like a dog that had finally learned there was no escape. You think you've won something, he said as she cuffed him. You think this changes anything. But there are more like me, more like Haskell, and they're not going to let some woman with a savior complex tear down everything they built. Maybe not, Evelyn said, but I'm going to make them try. The arrest made headlines within the command structure. 2 men, 1 program, years of systematic abuse and profit exposed in less than a month. But the victory was short-lived, because Vance had been telling the truth about one thing. He wasn't alone. The complaint arrived on day 22, formal, official, signed by 3 senior officers at the 06 level, alleging that Evelyn's methods endangered operational readiness, that her protocols prioritize animal welfare over mission success, that her personal history of handler failure made her unfit for command. Lieutenant Commander Harrison called at 1800 hours. The complaint has teeth, Mercer. It's being taken seriously at levels I can't control. What do they want? Proof, demonstration, something that shows your methods produce combat-ready assets, not therapy projects. A pause. I'm sending an evaluation team. They'll design the scenario. You'll have 48 hours notice. And if we fail, then I can't protect you. The program goes back to traditional methods. And every handler who believed in what you were building goes down with you. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in her office and stared at the wall. 6 days remained of her 25-day evaluation period. 6 days to prove everything. That trust produced better results than fear. That partnership created stronger bonds than dominance. That Shadow hadn't died for nothing. She called Thornton, told him about Vance, about the complaint, about the evaluation that would determine everything. He was quiet for a long time. You're fighting 2 battles, he said finally. One against them, one against yourself. I know. Do you? Because the second one is harder, and if you're not careful, it'll cost you the first. What do you mean? I mean you're still carrying Shadow, still trying to prove that his death meant something by saving every dog you can. But that's not leadership, Evelyn. That's penance. His voice softened. Leadership is trusting your team to do the work you've prepared them for. It's letting go of the outcome long enough to focus on the process. It's believing that what you've built is strong enough to stand on its own. And if it isn't, then you learn, and you build again. That's all any of us can do. Evelyn closed her eyes. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you do. You've known since the moment you walked into that cage, and 3 broken dogs chose to trust you instead of tear you apart. A pause. You're ready, Evelyn. The question is whether you believe it. The next 6 days were the hardest of her life. Harder than Afghanistan. Harder than watching Shadow die. Harder than every moment of doubt and guilt that had followed. Because this time, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was everything she'd built. Every handler who'd believed in her. Every dog who'd learned to trust again. She trained them all. Not with pressure, not with fear, with patience, with repetition, with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally learned to believe in her own methods. Briggs and Rebel worked explosive detection patterns until the dog could clear a compound-sized area in under 8 minutes with zero false alerts. Peters and Titan practiced tactical apprehension, controlled aggression that could stop a threat without turning into uncontrolled violence. Ghost, the dog who 3 weeks ago couldn't work with male handlers, now responded to subtle hand signals from Briggs with precision that made the other handlers stop and watch. Dr. Aldridge designed stress inoculation protocols, exposing dogs to gunfire, explosions, chaos in measured doses, building confidence instead of triggering trauma. And through it all, Evelyn watched, not controlling, trusting, believing that what she'd built was strong enough to prove them all wrong. On the night before the evaluation, she sat alone in the kennel area. Titan lay beside her, head on his paws, breathing slow and steady, recovered, calm, ready. "You know what's coming tomorrow?" she asked quietly. Titan's ear twitched, but he didn't move. "Everything we've worked for, everything we've built, it all comes down to whether you can show them what I already know." She put a hand on his flank, felt the steady rhythm of his heart. "That you're not broken. You were never broken. You just needed someone who spoke your language." Titan lifted his head, looked at her with those dark eyes that had once been empty. They weren't empty now. They were full of something she'd seen only once before, in Shadow's eyes in those final moments on the mountain. Trust. Evelyn smiled. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know. I trust you too." She stayed with him until midnight, then went to her barracks, set her alarm for 0500, and for the first time in 18 months, slept without dreaming of Afghanistan. End of part 2. In part 3, everything Evelyn built faces its ultimate test, a high-stakes evaluation designed to prove her methods wrong, a final confrontation with the forces that want her to fail, and a discovery that will change military dog training forever. The silent command isn't just a technique, it's a legacy, and tomorrow she'll find out if it's strong enough to survive. The evaluation team arrived at 0700 hours. 3 vehicles, government plates, the kind of convoy that announced importance before anyone stepped out. Evelyn watched from the admin building window as 5 figures emerged into the California morning. 3 senior officers in dress uniforms, ribbons stacked deep, faces carved from decades of command decisions. 2 civilian contractors in tactical casual. DoD security badges visible. Tablets already out, already recording. And behind them a 6th figure, younger, carrying camera equipment, documentation. Whatever happened today would be preserved, analyzed, used as evidence for or against everything she'd built. Evelyn straightened her uniform, checked her reflection in the window glass. Calm, professional, ready. She walked out to meet them. The senior officer leading the group was Captain William Ashford, 54 years old, 26 years in service, face like granite weathered by salt air and hard decisions. He didn't offer his hand. "Captain Mercer, we've reviewed your preliminary reports. Impressive documentation, but documentation isn't demonstration." "No, sir, it isn't. We've designed a scenario that will test your program's operational readiness under combat-realistic conditions. Compound clearance with multiple rooms, simulated IEDs, role players acting as hostile targets and civilian non-combatants." He glanced at his tablet. "You'll have 4 hours to prepare your teams. Evaluation begins at 1100 hours. Questions?" "None, sir." Ashford studied her for a long moment, his eyes giving nothing away. "I'll be honest with you, Captain. I came here expecting to find a reason to shut this program down. The complaint against you was detailed and persuasive. The officers who signed it have decades of experience and impeccable records." He paused. "But I've also learned that experience can become blindness, and impeccable records sometimes hide uncomfortable truths." His voice softened, just slightly. "Show me something worth keeping, Captain, because right now that's the only thing standing between your program and termination." He walked past her toward the training yard. The others followed, and Evelyn stood alone for 5 seconds, breathing through the weight that had just settled on her shoulders. 4 hours. 4 hours to prove that 25 days of work meant something. That trust was stronger than fear, that she'd been right all along. She found Briggs in the kennel area, already preparing the dogs, already anticipating what she would ask. "I heard the convoy," he said. "How bad?" "Bad enough. They're not here to validate. They're here to find reasons to tear everything down. And if they do?" Evelyn looked at Rebel, who was watching them both with alert, focused eyes. No more throwing himself against fences. No more desperate confusion. Just calm readiness. "Then we make sure they can't." The preparation was methodical. Evelyn had 4 hours. She used 3 of them for rest. The handlers questioned her decision. Even Briggs raised an eyebrow. "We should be drilling," he said, "running the scenarios, making sure everyone's sharp." "They're already sharp. What they need now is recovery. Fresh minds, fresh bodies. Dogs that aren't running on adrenaline fumes." She looked at him steadily. "Trust the process, Briggs. That's what I've been teaching you for 3 weeks. Time to see if you learned it." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." The dogs rested in their kennels. Handlers grabbed what sleep they could in the break room. Evelyn walked the perimeter of the training yard, visualizing the compound layout, anticipating the challenges. At 1000 hours, she gathered her team. 3 handler pairs, 3 dogs, 3 chances to prove everything. Briggs and Rebel for explosive detection, Peters and Titan for tactical apprehension. Briggs again with Ghost for the compound clearance. The most complex evolution. The one that would test everything. "Listen carefully," Evelyn said. "What happens in the next few hours determines whether this program survives, whether the work we've done means anything, whether these dogs get the future they deserve." She looked at each handler in turn. "But I'm not going to tell you to be perfect. Perfection isn't the goal. Connection is. Trust is. The bond between you and your partner." She knelt down, ran her hand along Rebel's flank. "These dogs have been failed before, by handlers who didn't understand them, by methods that broke instead of built. Today we show everyone watching that there's a better way." She stood. "Not by being flawless, by being partners. Whatever happens out there, you trust your dog, and your dog trusts you. That's the only thing that matters." Briggs nodded. Peters nodded. The third handler, a young petty officer named Wallace who'd been with the program less than 2 weeks, looked nervous but determined. "Any questions?" Silence. "Then let's show them what we've built." The evaluation began at 1100 hours precisely. Captain Ashford stood at the observation point with his team. Tablets recording, cameras rolling, every moment documented for the report that would determine the program's fate. First evolution, explosive detection. Briggs and Rebel entered the mock compound. 6 rooms, multiple concealment points, training aids hidden in locations designed to test even the most experienced detection teams. Evelyn watched from outside the fence, hands in her pockets, face neutral, but her heart was pounding. Rebel moved through the first room like water finding its path, nose working constantly. Processing scent molecules at concentrations humans couldn't even measure. He cleared the room in 45 seconds, moved to the second. Briggs followed behind, calm, patient, letting the dog work instead of directing him. In the third room, Rebel paused. His body went rigid. That perfect point that every handler recognized. Alert. He'd found something. Briggs marked the location, moved on. 4th room, 5th, 6th. 3 more alerts, each one precise. Each one confirmed by the evaluation team. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. 4 training aids located. 0 false alerts. Ashford made a note on his tablet, his expression unchanged. But one of the civilian contractors leaned over and whispered something that made the captain's eyebrow rise. Second evolution. Tactical apprehension. Peters and Titan took position outside the target building. Inside, a role player waited, armed with a training weapon, instructed to resist, to escalate, to test the limits of the dog's control. Peters gave the command. Titan moved, fast, focused. 88 pounds of trained precision hurtling toward the threat. The role player raised his weapon. Titan adjusted mid-stride. Angle perfect. Timing perfect. Contact. Full bite on the padded sleeve. Controlled aggression. Not frenzy, not chaos. Discipline. The role player struggled. Tried to break free. Titan held. Pressure constant. Eyes locked on the threat. Peters moved in, secured the role player, gave the release command. Titan let go immediately, sat at Peters' side. Calm, waiting. No residual aggression, no continued attack, just clean, professional execution. Ashford made another note. This time Evelyn saw something flicker in his eyes. Not quite belief, but the beginning of doubt in his own assumptions. Third evolution, compound clearance. The most complex test, the one designed to break them. Multiple rooms, concealed threats, civilians mixed with hostiles, decisions that had to be made in fractions of seconds. Briggs and Ghost took position at the entry point. Ghost, the dog who 3 weeks ago couldn't work with male handlers, who flinched at sudden movements, who carried scars on his muzzle from impacts that had nothing to do with training. Now he stood alert, focused, ready, trusting the handler beside him. The signal came. They moved. First room clear in 30 seconds. Ghost's nose identified no threats. Briggs confirmed visually. They advanced. Second room held a role player. Civilian clothes, no weapon visible. Ghost's body language shifted. Alert but not aggressive, not a threat. Briggs confirmed, moved past. Third room. Ghost froze. His hackles rose. A low growl building in his chest. Threat detected. Briggs signaled. Tactical approach. They moved together. Handler and dog. Two parts of the same unit. The role player emerged from concealment. Training weapon raised. Ghost engaged. Controlled. Precise. The same disciplined aggression Titan had demonstrated. Neutralized in seconds. Fourth room. Fifth. Sixth. Each one cleared with the same precision, the same partnership, the same trust that Evelyn had been building since the moment she walked into that cage with 3 starving dogs and spoke their language instead of trying to break them. When Briggs and Ghost emerged from the final room, the compound fully cleared, Ashford's team had stopped taking notes. They were just watching. In silence. The kind of silence that grew when people witnessed something that changed their understanding of what was possible. Ashford approached Evelyn after the evaluation teams finished their documentation. His face was still unreadable, but something had shifted in his posture, in the way he looked at her. Captain Mercer, a word. They walked to the edge of the training yard, away from the others. 26 years, Ashford said quietly. 26 years I've been doing this job, evaluating programs, making recommendations that shape how we train, how we fight, how we send young men and women into harm's way. He turned to face her. In all that time, I've never seen dogs perform like that. Not just the technical execution, the connection, the trust between handler and animal. He shook his head slowly. I came here to find a reason to shut you down. The complaint was convincing. The officers who signed it have records I respect. And everything I thought I knew about working dog programs told me that your methods were too soft for combat reality. A pause. I was wrong. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. What happens now, sir? Now I write a report that's going to make some very senior people very uncomfortable. Because I'm not just recommending that your program continue. I'm recommending that your protocols be adopted as standard across all NSWC K9 programs. He extended his hand. Evelyn shook it. Congratulations, Captain. You just changed the game. After Ashford's team departed, Evelyn sat alone in her office. The weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for 25 days was gone, replaced by something else. Not victory, not vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd proven something that mattered. That shadow hadn't died for nothing. That the choice she'd made on that Afghan mountain, the one that still woke her at 3 in the morning, had led her here. To this moment, to these dogs, to this chance to build something better. Her phone buzzed. Text from Thornton. Heard the news, proud of you. Your father would be too. She typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally settled on, thank you for everything. His reply came 3 minutes later. You did this, not me. Now comes the harder part. She stared at the screen. What's harder than rebuilding a broken program? Building a legacy, making it last after you're gone, teaching others to teach others. That's how real change happens. He was right. Of course, he was right. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something larger, something that would outlive her career, her service, maybe her life. The thought should have been daunting. Instead, it felt like relief, like she'd finally found the mission that made sense of all the ones that came before. 6 months passed, not in a blur this time, in the measured, purposeful rhythm of sustainable change. The facility was renamed, not after Haskell, obviously, after Thornton, only after Evelyn insisted, and only after the old colonel came down from his ranch for the dedication ceremony and made a speech about how real leadership meant knowing when to step aside and let better people do better work. The Thornton Military Working Dog Training Center. It had a nice ring to it. The protocols Evelyn developed became the new standard, adopted across all NSWC K9 programs, studied by training facilities and other branches, referenced in academic papers about canine behavioral science. Trust-based training wasn't soft anymore. It was doctrine, and the dogs themselves became the proof. Titan deployed to Syria with Sergeant Claire Donovan, a Marine handler with 3 deployments and zero tolerance for shortcuts. 3 weeks into her rotation, Titan alerted on a weapons cache hidden in an irrigation tunnel. The kind of concealment that had killed Marines before. The kind that would have gone undetected by dogs trained with fear instead of partnership. 12 Marines walked away from an ambush they never saw coming. Because Titan had learned to trust, and Donovan had learned to listen. She sent Evelyn an email with a photo attached. Titan sitting alert against a Syrian sunset, tongue lolling in what looked suspiciously like a smile. "He's my partner, saved my life. You prepared us both, thank you." Evelyn pinned that photo to her office wall, right next to Shadow's memorial picture. 2 dogs, 2 different outcomes. Same lesson about trust. Ghost retired from active service. His trauma was too deep for combat deployment, but Dr. Aldridge found him a different mission, the VA therapy dog program. He was paired with Walter Brennan, 89 years old, Korean War veteran, carrying 70 years of PTSD from Chosin Reservoir, nightmares that hadn't stopped since 1950. Aldridge called Evelyn 3 months after the pairing. "You need to see this." They drove together to the San Diego Veterans Center where Brennan lived in assisted care, found the old Marine in the therapy garden, sitting on a bench with Ghost's head resting on his lap. Brennan looked up when they approached. His eyes were clearer than they'd been in decades. "This dog," he said, voice rough with age and emotion, "he's got the same eyes as my war dog. Ace. Lost him in Korea. Thought I'd never—" He stopped, stroked Ghost's scarred muzzle. "He sleeps by my bed now. First time I've slept through the night in 70 years. Ghost's tail thumped once against the bench. Slow, content. The tail of a dog who'd found his purpose after years of believing he didn't have one. Evelyn knelt beside them. Ghost turned his head. Recognition immediate. He made a soft sound in his throat. The kind that meant, "I remember you. You're the one who understood." "He's doing good work here," Brennan said. "Saving me. Same way I'm sure he saved people in his first life." His eyes met Evelyn's. "Dogs like this, they're not done serving just because they can't deploy anymore. They just need someone to show them a different mission." "No, sir," Evelyn said quietly. "They're not." Rebel stayed with Briggs. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Briggs, who'd started as the handler filming her potential mauling, had become one of the program's best instructors. Patient, thoughtful, teaching new handlers that listening mattered more than volume. And Rebel, the dog who'd washed out twice, labeled too aggressive for deployment, written off by everyone who'd ever worked with him. He became the top-performing narcotics detection dog in naval special warfare. On day 92 of Evelyn's tenure, he alerted on 40 kilograms of fentanyl hidden in a ship's ventilation system at San Diego port. Record bust. 3 arrests. Millions of dollars of poison kept off the streets. Briggs brought Rebel to Evelyn's office the day after. No appointment. Just showed up at her door. "Can we talk?" They walked to the training yard, where this had all started 6 months ago. The cage was gone now. Dismantled. Metal sold for scrap. In its place, an obstacle course designed for confidence building instead of stress testing. Briggs stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at where the cage used to be. I was wrong about everything, he said. About you, about training, about what these dogs needed. I spent 8 years thinking I was good at my job, and I was just breaking things, breaking them and calling it progress. You didn't know better. Now you do. I should have known better, should have questioned it when dogs kept washing out, when handlers kept getting bit, when every evolution felt like a fight instead of a partnership. He looked at Rebel, sitting calmly beside him. He tried to tell me, for 2 years, he tried to tell me he wasn't aggressive. He was just different, and I punished him for it. But you changed. That matters more. Briggs nodded slowly. Thank you for not giving up on us, either of us. I didn't save you, Evelyn said. Rebel did. I just showed you how to listen. And Coda, Briggs's own dog, the one Haskell had threatened to wash out, the one that had forced Briggs to choose between his conscience and his partner's life. Coda became the program's heart, not a deployment dog, something better. The demonstration animal who showed every new handler what trust-based training could achieve. Patient, gentle, the perfect teacher for humans learning to unlearn everything they thought they knew. Every candidate who came through the program worked with Coda first, learning to wait, learning to listen, learning that the silence between commands was where the real communication happened. Briggs had saved him by betraying the system that would have destroyed him. Now Coda was saving others, one handler at a time. The news about Haskell and Vance came through official channels. NCIS completed their investigation. Federal charges filed. Trial dates set. Haskell received 6 years federal prison, dishonorable discharge, lifetime ban from working with animals. Vance got 4 years, same discharge, same ban. Special Agent Reeves called with the final update. 8 of the 11 dogs have been recovered, being transported back now. The other 3, her voice softened. We've confirmed they're deceased. Combat operations in Africa. Poor handling. We're pursuing charges against the contractors, but international jurisdiction is complicated. 3 dogs, dead in wars that weren't theirs, handled by men who didn't deserve them. Evelyn added their names to the memorial she'd started building in her office. They deserved to be remembered, even if no one else would. The day the facility was officially renamed, 400 people gathered in the training yard. Handlers, veterans, families of Marines who'd been saved by dogs trained under the new protocols, Dr. Aldridge and her veterinary team, representatives from 3 other military branches who'd come to study the program, and Colonel James Thornton, walking with a cane now, age finally catching up with him, but still straight-backed, still carrying himself like the warrior he'd always been. Evelyn stood beside him as they unveiled the new sign. Thornton Military Working Dog Training Center. I tried to refuse, Thornton said quietly. Told them to name it after you instead. And I told them that without you, I wouldn't have known where to begin. Stubborn woman. Learn from the best, he smiled, the first time she'd seen him smile without sadness lurking in the corners. Your father would have loved this, the ceremony, the recognition. All these people gathered to honor something he believed in his whole life. He never saw it. No, but you did, and you made it real. Thornton put a hand on her shoulder. That's what legacy means, Evelyn. Not living long enough to see the change. It's planting seeds that grow after you're gone. The ceremony ended with Thornton saying a few words about service, about sacrifice, about the bond between handlers and dogs that had existed since the first wolf decided that humans were worth trusting, and about Evelyn. This woman, he said, voice carrying across the silent crowd, walked into a cage with 3 dogs that had every reason to kill her. And instead of fighting them, she spoke their language. She showed them that trust was still possible, even after everything they'd suffered. He looked at her. That's not training. That's not technique. That's leadership. The kind you can't teach. The kind that only comes from understanding that strength without compassion is just violence with better marketing. The crowd applauded, but Evelyn barely heard them. She was looking at the kennel area, where 14 dogs lived in conditions that honored their service instead of breaking their spirits. At Briggs, standing with Rebel and Coda, all of them calm, focused, partners. At the photos on her office wall, Shadow, Titan, Ghost. The dogs who taught her that the hardest commands weren't the ones you shouted. They were the ones you earned. 1 month after the dedication ceremony, Evelyn received notification that the first handler class under the new protocols had been selected. 400 applicants for 12 spots. 4 of the 12 were women. She read through their files that night, alone in her office, getting to know the people who would carry this forward after she was gone. Cadet Emma Whitmore, 24 years old, former Army MP, 3 years of experience with working dogs. Evaluation notes described her as patient, intuitive, and unusually perceptive about canine body language. The others were similar. Men and women who'd shown aptitude for the new approach. Who understood that partnership produced better results than dominance? The future of everything she'd built. On the first day of training, Evelyn stood before them in the yard. 12 faces, nervous, eager, ready to learn. She didn't climb on anything, didn't manufacture authority, just stood at their level and told them a story about a dog named Shadow who'd saved 11 men and died in the process. About a cage and 3 starving dogs in a moment when everything changed. About a program built on cruelty and rebuilt on trust. About the difference between domination and partnership. When she finished, Whitmore raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do we know when we're doing it right?" Evelyn thought about that question, about all the ways she could answer it with technique or theory or doctrine. Instead, she said, "You'll know you're doing it right when the dog chooses you. Not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Not because they've been beaten into compliance, but because you've become worth following." She looked at each of them in turn. That's the only metric that matters. That evening, after the candidates had finished their first day and the facility had grown quiet, Evelyn drove to the Military Working Dog Memorial Cemetery, 20 miles north of Coronado. Small place, quiet, rows of markers for K9s who died in service, each one carrying a name, a rank, a date, and a simple truth. They'd served faithfully until the end. Shadow's marker was near the back, under a live oak that filtered evening light into dancing shadows. She knelt beside it and placed something new, her K9 program director patch, the one she'd worn for 6 months, the one that symbolized everything she'd built, every dog she'd saved, every handler she'd trained, every moment she'd chosen trust over fear. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. 11 men you saved, and now Titan saved 12 more. And Ghost is helping an old Marine finally sleep. And Rebel," she smiled through the tears she'd finally allowed to fall. Rebel proved that aggressive just meant misunderstood when nobody bothered to listen. She traced her fingers over the engraved letters of his name. "It meant something, Shadow. All of it. Everything you taught me. It meant something." She remembered his eyes in those final moments on the mountain, the way he'd looked at her while the medic worked on Sergeant Webb. Not accusation, not betrayal, just that quiet certainty that she would do the right thing, that she would make his death count. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You knew I'd have to choose, and you made it easy for me. Stayed calm, stayed still, gave me permission to let you go." A tear traced down her cheek, the first she'd allowed herself since that mountain in Afghanistan. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were teaching me. That trust isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go and believing that what you've given will be enough." Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn, didn't need to. She'd know that cadence anywhere. Thornton stopped beside her, looking down at the marker. "I come here sometimes," he said, "when I need to remember why we do this." Why do we? Because they can't speak for themselves. Because they give us everything they have and ask nothing in return except that we be worthy of their trust. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Your father would be proud. I know because I'm proud." Evelyn stood, faced him. "You taught me everything. I taught you technique. You brought the heart. That's the difference." They stood together in the fading light, 2 generations of handlers, connected by the dogs who'd shaped them both. "What now?" Evelyn asked. "Now you teach 12 new handlers who need to learn what you know. And then they teach 12 more. And then those teach 12 more. He smiled. That's how change lasts, not through one person's lifetime, through everyone they touch. The next morning, Evelyn stood before her class again. 12 faces, a little less nervous now, a little more focused. Behind the candidates, Briggs was working with Rebel in the training yard. No shouting, no force, just quiet communication between two beings who'd learned to speak each other's language. And beyond them, in the kennels, 14 dogs lived in conditions that honored their service. And somewhere in Syria, Titan was saving lives with a handler who trusted him completely. And in a VA hospital in San Diego, Ghost was giving a Korean War veteran his first peaceful sleep in 70 years. And in a memorial cemetery north of Coronado, Shadow's marker stood beneath a live oak tree, carrying the weight of sacrifice and the promise that it hadn't been wasted. Evelyn began the day's lesson. Yesterday, I told you how to know when you're doing it right. Today, I'm going to tell you why it matters. She paused. The relationship between handler and dog is the oldest partnership in human history. 10,000 years of working together, hunting together, fighting together, dying together. She looked at each of them. In all that time, we've tried every method imaginable. Dominance, punishment, fear, and some of those methods produced results. Dogs that obeyed, dogs that performed, dogs that did what they were told. Another pause. But obedience isn't partnership. Performance isn't trust. And dogs that do what they're told out of fear will fail you at the moment you need them most. She walked to the fence, looked out at the training yard where Briggs and Rebel were finishing their morning routine. The dogs you'll work with here have been failed before, by handlers who didn't understand them, by methods that broke instead of built. Your job isn't to fix them, it's to earn them. She turned back. Every dog in this program has something to teach you about patience, about communication, about the kind of trust that doesn't come from commands. It comes from consistency, from respect, from being the same person every single day, no matter what. Whitmore was taking notes. So were most of the others. But one candidate, a young man named Collins, raised his hand. Ma'am, what if we can't earn them? What if some dogs are too broken to trust again? Evelyn thought about Titan, about Ghost, about Rebel throwing himself against the fence because nobody understood what he was trying to say. I've never met a dog that was too broken to trust again, she said. I've only met handlers who gave up too soon. She walked back to stand before them. The silent command isn't a technique. It's not something you can learn from a manual or practice in a drill. It's the moment when everything you've built comes together. When the dog looks at you and sees someone worth following. When you look at the dog and see a partner instead of a tool. Her voice softened. That moment can't be forced. It can't be rushed. It can only be earned. One day at a time. One interaction at a time. One choice at a time. She smiled. And when it happens, you'll know, because it will feel like coming home. The class ended at noon. Evelyn watched the candidates file out toward the kennel area for their first introductions to the dogs they'd be working with. Whitmore hung back. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The dog you lost, Shadow. You said he taught you everything, but you also said he died because you made a choice. Her eyes were curious, not challenging. How do you carry both of those things, the gratitude and the guilt? Evelyn considered the question. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, I used to think I had to choose, that I could either be grateful for what Shadow gave me or guilty about how he died, that the two couldn't exist together. She looked toward the memorial where Shadow's marker stood, but that's not how it works. Grief isn't a problem to be solved. It's a weight to be carried. And the only way to carry it is to let it make you stronger instead of breaking you down. She met Whitmore's eyes. Shadow trusted me to make the hard call, to choose 11 men over him. And I did. That choice cost me something I'll never get back. But it also gave me something I didn't know I needed. What? Purpose. The understanding that some things are worth more than my own comfort. That leadership means carrying weights other people can't see. And that the best way to honor what Shadow gave me is to make sure no other dog suffers because nobody bothered to learn their language. Whitmore nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. She walked toward the kennels, and Evelyn stood alone in the training yard, feeling the California sun on her face, hearing the distant sounds of dogs who were learning to trust again. This was the legacy, not the facility that bore Thornton's name, not the protocols that were changing military dog training, not even the dogs she'd saved or the handlers she'd taught. The legacy was the understanding, the silent command that passed from one generation to the next, the knowledge that strength without trust was just violence, that partnership was stronger than dominance, that the most powerful words were often the ones never spoken. Shadow had taught her that, in those crucial seconds of trust instead of fear, in a final breath that sounded like relief instead of pain, in eyes that held no accusation, only faith that she would make it mean something. And she had, one dog at a time, one handler at a time. One moment of understanding that bridged the gap between species and said, I see you, I hear you, I won't fail you. That was the silent command, and it would echo long after she was gone, through every dog that learned to trust again, through every handler who learned to listen, through every life saved by the bond between human and canine that had existed since the beginning and would exist until the end.